So first off, I would also like to thank the organizers very much for the invitation. It's really an honor to speak to you at this occasion. And what I'm going to tell you is pretty much complementing what Richard and Charlotte have already presented to you. As you understood, I'm an astronomy librarian, so working at what you want to call an observatory, so to say. And to start off, I really would like to give you some background information on astronomy and our situation there. Sorry, you do see the slides. You do see. Thank you. So if you imagine the general work culture in astronomy, of course, it's clear that observatories typically, historically, they are very far away located from each other. So this geographical distance, however, has never stopped the community, and when I say community, I mean both researchers and librarians, to work very closely together. So we are very closely connected. And there's a strong tradition, actually, of sharing and exchanging papers, manuscripts, best practices, data, source code, you name it. So this is almost in the DNA of astronomy. And that carries forward, as Charlotte has already hinted at. We have a very wide-ranging read access to our literature in astronomy. First off, because there's a very widespread use of green open access, where our researchers really put their manuscripts on archive, SGPH, on the ePrint server. Basically, the idea is if as an astronomer you don't put your manuscript there, your colleagues just don't see you. However, worth noticing that this typically happens without an open license. So there's no CC BY license. It's really read access, not full open access. Then, as Charlotte also pointed out already, our core journals, and I'll explain in a moment what we mean with that, they have been digitized. They're freely available back to volume 1. So this is really a very special situation where the archives are freely available to everybody. Also, in the pre-open access era, publishers had a, let's say, generous approach, and often they provided temporary access to selected individual but very recent, very new articles. And then on top of that, free access was provided to the entire journal's content after only 1 year into the publication. So that's all a very favorable situation. And that can be seen also then, if we look away from the manuscripts, to the core journals in astronomy. What do I mean when I say core journals? These are the journals publishing research articles. So going back to Richard's presentation, of course, astronomy and the annual reviews of astronomy and astrophysics, that is the publication every astronomer knows, and it's the milestone publications. But what I'm talking about here is the original research articles. So we only have 4 of these journals, as Charlotte mentioned already, and more than 35% of the entire refereed astronomy literature is published in these journals. If I look at my own first author refereed papers at ESO, more than 90% published in these journals. So that's really big. And as Charlotte has said, also they are governed by learned societies or the community, and then published in cooperation with commercial publishers. So the learned societies are the American Astronomical Society, the Royal Astronomical Society, and then ESO, but mostly the community of the member countries, astronomers, and the Czech Republic is part of that. Now, long story short, what I'm trying to say here is that the community of researchers really has a strong influence on publishing developments. And that, on the other hand, also means that astronomers often do not see the full advantage of what is going on elsewhere by funders and outside of astronomy, namely that there is a strong drive towards full open access. So sometimes our astronomers say, you know what, actually, I'm happy with the status quo. I don't really need more. So as a librarian, I want to explain to them the additional benefits of open access solutions. But in order to do that, and in order to get their buy-in, I need open access solutions with minimal researcher burden. It should be easy for them. So that's my prerequisite. And as was mentioned before, now, in the meanwhile, the 4 core journals have already flipped to open access or will do so as of next year, the monthly notices of the Royal Astronomical Society. However, they use very different business models. And that brings me to the core of my presentation, where I want to tell you a little bit about the various open access models and what I think about them. Now, a few years ago, there was already quite a varied open access or publishing landscape, and I got confused myself. So in order to help myself get order into the various models that were out there, I started to set up a table, to make a table and kind of categorize the various models that I could find out. And I looked into who pays for this, who can read, who can publish, and I put this in this table. It's available at the DOI that I'm giving here at the top of the table. You can look it up. I do not want to go through this here in detail. I just would like to look at these concepts at a slightly higher level approach, so to say. So for these 5 categories of open access publishing, I would like to give you an overview of the core concepts that we find behind these categories. Then we will briefly look at the costs involved, and I would give you my personal assessment, basically pros and cons. Let's start with the one that is best known, probably, and certainly also why this applied. That's the APCs, article processing charges. It's often also referred to as gold open access, and it's clear that this is at present the dominant model. Under APC-based open access, the charges are directly given to the authors when they want to publish. So what we see here is that we are going from a system where we pay when we want to read through subscriptions from a reader's pay model over to an author's pay model. For publishing, there are certain fees. At the same time, typically the subscriptions are then out of the picture, because otherwise we create what we call hybrid journals, and that means that then there's this danger of going twice into the pockets of the customers or the community, the double dipping. So I think the hybrid journals will, in the relatively short run, probably be phased out anyway. Now, with these APCs, what we have seen very soon after they became available are unintended side effects. Namely, they immediately gave rise to what we call predatory publishers. And why predatory? Because basically they were not applying proper quality control. These publishers are then publishing whatever comes their way, no proper editing, no proper refereeing, as long as the authors are willing to pay. And that led to a very bad reputation of the open access model at large, unintended, unwanted, and also unnecessary. But for many years, people thought open access is low quality, which of course is not true. If we look at the costs that come with APCs, of course, the article processing charges, they vastly depend on the individual journal. They can be from, relatively low, let's say, up to 10,000 euros per article. So it can be really humongous costs. And as a consequence, we often see that in particular for those research organizations that produce many papers, so they are rich in their research performing activities, they see vastly increased costs. Now, my view, as you may guess already, I deeply dislike APCs. I think what they are achieving is solely to shift an access barrier that we had before when it came to reading. This is now shifted over to publishing, but nothing else has been achieved. Therefore, I always emphasize APC-based open access is not equitable. Now, you may say, yeah, but many publishers implement something like APC waivers, so they want to help. Yes, okay, fine. They are well-intended, I would like to say, but I still think they are patronizing, because as an individual author, you need to knock on the door of the publishers and say, hey, hello, here I am. I don't have so much money. Could you please? And that's not right. I think this is not how it should be in a modern, hopefully, future publishing landscape. For those authors also who are not used to page charges and the like, it's a disruptive process because they have to handle now the payments, the individual invoices. Planning publishing budgets also becomes a little bit weird, if not impossible at the beginning, simply because we don't know how many articles will be published where. Also, and I think this is an important point, this model requires a new institutional infrastructure. On the one hand, from a logistical point of view, the budget, where will it be sitting? Will it be in the administration? Will it be in the library? Will it be with each individual researcher? But more importantly, we need to define ethical guidelines because no doubt this publishing budget that we will have is limited. So how do we distribute? Do we do it like first the professors and then the students, or first the students and then the professors, or first the ladies and then the gentlemen? You see, what most likely will be the consequence is we do it on a first come, first served basis. And then we will find ourselves in a situation where, let's say in July and August, the publishing budget is exhausted and no more publishing. Now, there's another flavor also of gold open access, but it's a vastly different approach. These journals are called overlay journals. And what is happening here is that an existing infrastructure, such as archive, some e-print infrastructure is used as the backbone. And on top, there's a refereeing system. These initiatives, they are typically run by volunteering researchers, and they are the budget that they have available comes typically from grants, from foundations, let's say. In astronomy, one such example is the Open Journal of Astrophysics, which you can find if you wanted to have a look at the URL that I'm giving here. Now, if we look at the costs, of course, they are very low, if any. And one of the reasons is simply that there are no in-house services, so to say. There's no copy editing, there's no typesetting, everything is done by the authors themselves. From a librarian's view, well, in my view, I think it's a very interesting move forward. However, there are also some big question marks. So one is, we said that these efforts are based on grants. So how about the long-term sustainability? What will happen when the grants run out? There's also, of course, a danger of losing the expertise of publishers. As you see, in a certain way, they are reinventing the wheel. These volunteers are doing now the work. But, we have publishers and they know how to do their job. So we lose this. Critical here is also that the unknown titles lack recognition. And I'm not talking about the journal impact factor here. Let's leave that out of the equation. But the sheer knowledge of the existence of such titles among the community. So what is clear is that these overlay journals, because they are so new, they critically require a larger shift towards open science and changes in research evaluation. So only in a situation where the sheer availability, open availability of the manuscript, or rather the paper, maybe the underlying data, the code that was used, if that is actually valued rather than whether the community knows or does not know that specific title, then the overlay journals actually will gain traction, I think. Next in my list is the read and publish, or also sometimes called publish and read agreements. Now, you will all know that these are, of course, high-level agreements between research organizations or sometimes entire countries. Charlotte mentioned that they have one of these in place, also with France, and the publishers. Traditionally, these agreements were called transformative agreements because the idea was they are going towards something, but it was never really clear towards what. So I think it's better to call them just read and publish agreements because this is what they are. They usually provide read access to a publisher's entire portfolio, closed and also open, of course. And then on top, the subscribing or participating organization has also a certain quota of open access publishing for their authors available. Examples here are the big players, so to say. So it's Springer Nature, Elsevier, the Wileys of the world. If we look at the costs, we see that we have a very complex cost calculation here, because typically the previous subscription costs are the basis of the cost calculation, and then on top, an estimated number of papers that should be published then open access. However, they all come with their individual price tag. So it's all circled around APCs. Critically dangerous here, I think, is that the number of open access articles usually is capped. It's limited. And then if you want to go beyond what has been agreed in these agreements, you really have to be aware that the individual charge for one article can be massive. So participating organizations often actually find themselves confronted with higher costs than before. As a librarian, you understand that also here I'm a little bit skeptical. One thing that I really dislike, I hate about these models, is that we are going towards a new dependency. We are coming off from the subscription era, where we found ourselves sometimes in big deals, and the whole open access movement actually started because, or it was one of the major drivers, we wanted to overcome the big deals. Now we find ourselves back in the same situation. Also, these read and publish agreements, because they put a specific price tag on the individual manuscript, they cement the APC-based open access model. For me, as a librarian at a small and very specialized organization, it's also important to see that, maybe I don't have the need even to provide access to the entire portfolio of a specific publisher. So fast forward, I think if we wanted to really talk about useful read and publish agreements, there have to be some minimum requirements that need to be fulfilled. Among them, first of all, we need transparency. How do the publishers come up with a special price tag for a given article? And the publishing costs, of course, have to be reasonable. Also, unlimited open access publishing definitely is needed. And here again, I'm speaking as a librarian of a small and specialized organization. I would like to see our situation considered better. Now, the next model that I want to talk to you about is a bit more complicated. It's called subscription and rights retention, but maybe many of you have heard about that already. So the concept here really is that a manuscript, a publication, will be published in a closed traditional subscription journal. Now, the researchers that publish these articles, they may have funders requirements. And one of the requirements of the funders may be to put an open license on their manuscript resulting from the funding. So what is happening here is that the publishers say, okay, then you can take, you researcher, you take your peer-reviewed manuscript. So this is a fully refereed version of the manuscript, often referred to as author-accepted manuscript, or AAM. Put it in a repository with an open license, typically a CC BY. The example that you may know about is the Science magazine from the AAAS in the US, where we have the subscription-based journal as before, and then we also have a CC BY-equipped manuscript on a repository. The costs, if we look at the costs, well, nothing changes. It's as before, it's just the subscription. As a librarian, I think this is a very promising alternative, but B, we also have to be aware that now we end up with two parallel versions. We have the version of record published with the journal, and we have a parallel version, namely the AAM, with our open license. So to me, it seems that this is a viable, a feasible way forward for a journal maybe like Science, where you have, besides the research articles, other content. People will want to read more the news and views, the latest information. in magazines like Science. For other journals, it might become a danger, so to say. Also worthwhile noting here is that we are changing the fairness, where we say fair in the sense of making research output findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable of the manuscripts. We are not changing really the traditional journal publishing. And then last not least, I want to look at collaborative models like Subscribe to Open, about which Richard and Charlotte have told you already a lot. Just to reiterate what has been said multiple times now before. So this concept relies on the continued subscriptions from the libraries in order to achieve full and global open access. Why the libraries? Well, because as a librarian, I have already had a subscription, which means that my researchers are interested in this particular content. The free riders problem has also been mentioned before, and here the way around is really that open access is only achieved if really everybody participates. It's a collaborative model, right? The costs, again, are as before. The subscription costs continue to be there. I know that Richard said there are no discounts. Well, EDP also tried to make efforts to provide discounts, for instance. So there can be, for instance, early bird renewal discounts. And ideally, if a journal published under S2O leads to new readers, there could be an idea to reach out to these organizations to see whether they're willing to participate, which then, of course, would lower the fees for everybody. As a librarian, I think you can guess already that I'm a huge fan of this model. What convinces me in particular is that it uses the existing infrastructure for budget handling and other things, so it can be implemented fast. It is predictable, and best of all, it is equitable, very important point. It allows me as a specialized librarian to really reflect on the information needs of my community and for the individual researchers. The workflow is completely unchanged. Everything stays as before, and still global open access is achieved. And therefore, I believe that it will find a very high acceptance among the researchers community. So just to conclude, hello. So I think if we look ahead a little, what we will see is a very varied open access landscape. There is, of course, no one-fits-all model, and we probably will see a large mix of models in the coming years. Authors, of course, they should know the pros and cons of the various options that they have. However, I think that we as librarians play a very important role in guiding them, explaining, and helping them decide where to publish. Always remembering the initial open access goals, which were also to reduce or at the very minimum stabilize the costs. This was one of the main drivers of the whole open access movement. Let's not forget that. So I strongly believe that the move towards open access has to be cost neutral. And we all know that's already, we see already too much money basically in the whole publishing ecosystem. Very importantly, like I emphasized before, I think we need to avoid also a dependency on high-priced commercial publishers in the sense of the big deals that we saw before. I would say no more of that. Open access, I think, is really a paradigm shift. In our lifetime, we will not see any move as large as this one in publishing. So now is the moment to really get it right. We have this one chance, I think. As I tried to point out, we already see too many unintended side effects, like the continued injustice, for instance, of favoring authors from the global north. There are better open access models than the APC-based open access, but they need more attention. They need more visibility. We as librarians, we do make strategic choices when we enable open access. And my wish to us as a community is really to strive together with publishers, researchers, funders, the entire community, for collaborative, equitable, transparent, and sustainable open access models in order to achieve a better publishing landscape.